You'll be out of jail in 20 minutes.
Mr. Clarkson, could I ask you just to calm down, and your continued presence here has constituted a breach of the peace.
Listen to this and then I'll come back to you. It's the Prime Minister speaking to Beth Rigby of Sky News yesterday.
Did Andrew Neil just expose Keir Starmer's biggest weakness? In a shocking live TV encounter, Neil left the Labour leader scrambling for answers. As Starmer fumbled through his responses, Neil connected the dots between Jeremy Clarkson's arrest.
You'll be out of jail in 20 minutes.
Mr. Clarkson, could I ask you just to calm down, and your continued presence here has constituted a breach of the peace. I'm also arresting you, okay? Under Public Order Act, okay?
And Starmer's disconnect from rural communities. The result? A devastating critique that's left political commentators buzzing. Before we move on, I'd like to ask you a small favor. If you appreciate this content, please take a second to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Over 98% of you watch the videos without subscribing.
I say the door is open and you can leave. And I understand that some people won't like the changes that we've made.
It costs you nothing, but it makes a huge difference to us. So, did you click the subscribe button? Great. Thank you so much. Now back to the video. Andrew Neil's reputation as a hard-hitting interviewer preceded him as he faced off against Keir Starmer. Known for his uncompromising style, Neil wasted no time in zeroing in on Starmer's apparent lack of understanding when it comes to rural issues. As the interview began, Neil challenged Starmer on Labour's position on farming regulations. The Labour leader seemed caught off guard, struggling to articulate a clear stance. His hesitation was palpable as he fumbled through responses about agricultural policies that seemed disconnected from the realities faced by farmers across the country. Neil, sensing blood in the water, pressed harder. He presented a series of damning statistics highlighting Labour's neglect of agricultural communities, from underfunding of rural infrastructure to a lack of support for small farms.
Would you agree with me that there is nothing more important in the country than the well-being of children, yes or no?
Yes.
Big change. That would be a problem for Mr. Starmer, who is much cozier with the traditional European consensus.
The evidence painted a picture of a party out of touch with the countryside. But Neil wasn't done. He dug deeper, unveiling Starmer's voting record on rural development bills. The results were eye-opening. Time and again, Starmer had voted against measures that would have provided crucial support to farming communities. As Neil read out the list of missed opportunities, Starmer's discomfort was evident. The tension in the studio reached a fever pitch as Neil pushed Starmer to explain the glaring contradictions between his words and actions. Starmer's promises of support for rural areas stood in stark contrast to his voting history. His attempts to reconcile these inconsistencies fell flat, each explanation more convoluted than the last. As Starmer's responses became increasingly incoherent, the extent of his disconnect from rural voters became impossible to ignore. His fumbling answers revealed a fundamental lack of understanding of the challenges faced by farming communities. It was a stark reminder of the urban-centric focus that has dominated Labour's policies in recent years. Neil's relentless questioning left Starmer visibly shaken. The Labour leader's usual composure crumbled under the weight of Neil's surgical precision. As the segment drew to a close, it was clear that Starmer had been thoroughly outmaneuvered. The interview had exposed a critical weakness in Labour's approach to rural issues, leaving viewers to question whether Starmer could truly represent the interests of all British citizens. Just when Starmer thought the worst was behind him, Neil dropped a bombshell that threatened to unravel Labour's entire stance on civil liberties.
Because it's quite hard to see anywhere where the right is doing well, which does not now involve the populace, would be reduced to a rump on Thursday, then how does the right rebuild itself?
The arrest of a beloved TV personality was about to expose a chilling hypocrisy at the heart of Starmer's leadership. Neil seized on Jeremy Clarkson's recent arrest during a farmers' protest in London, using it as a springboard to dive into Labour's position on democratic freedoms. He pressed Starmer on the right to protest, a cornerstone of any healthy democracy. Starmer's response was telling, a jumble of vague platitudes that failed to address the core issue. As Starmer fumbled, Neil pounced. He presented a damning timeline of Labour's shifting stance on protest rights. What emerged was a party that seemed to change its tune, depending on which way the political winds were blowing.
Listen to this and then I'll come back to you. It's the Prime Minister speaking to Beth Rigby of Sky News yesterday.
Why it is that, my judgment call has been that when you've invited me to the Sky party costing thousands of pounds.
Starmer's discomfort was palpable as Neil recounted his previous statements supporting tougher protest laws. The contradiction was stark. How could a party claiming to champion civil liberties simultaneously advocate for restricting the right to dissent? But Neil wasn't done. He drew a direct line between Starmer's wavering stance on protests and his dismissive attitude towards the recent petition signed by over 3 million people calling for a new election. The implication was clear. Starmer's Labour seemed increasingly willing to silence voices of opposition, whether on the streets or through democratic channels. As Starmer scrambled to defend his position, Neil hammered home the point. He cited expert opinions.
The worse it gets, which is why your colleague now in the Lords too, I believe, Harriet Harman, said he ought to stop justifying all this.
Want a rerun. That isn't how our system works. There would be plenty of people who didn't want us in the first place. Of course you're right to ask questions, and because you've asked questions, I've given my explanation about why it is that I don't go in the stands at football now.
Warning of the dangers to democracy when governments curtail protest rights. The Labour leader's attempts to reconcile his party's contradictory positions grew increasingly desperate. With each evasive answer, Starmer's credibility seemed to erode further. The exchange laid bare a fundamental question. How could a potential Prime Minister struggle so visibly to defend basic democratic principles? Starmer's fumbling responses painted a picture of a leader at odds with the very values his party claimed to uphold. As Neil's masterful questioning continued, it became clear that Starmer was fighting a losing battle to maintain any semblance of consistency or principle. By the time Neil wrapped up this line of questioning, the damage was done. Starmer's defense had crumbled, leaving viewers with serious doubts about Labour's commitment to civil liberties and democratic values. What started as a discussion about a celebrity arrest had exposed a deeply troubling pattern at the heart of Starmer's leadership. Andrew Neil's relentless questioning laid bare the cracks in Starmer's leadership. The Labour leader's fumbling responses and contradictory positions exposed a worrying disconnect from core democratic values. Neil's surgical precision cut through Starmer's political rhetoric, revealing a man struggling to defend basic principles of civil liberties and rural representation. This confrontation raises serious questions about Labour's true commitments. Can a party that wavers on protest rights and dismisses millions of petition signatories truly claim to champion democracy? Starmer's inability to articulate a coherent stance on these issues left viewers questioning his fitness for higher office. As the dust settles on this explosive encounter, the implications are clear. A potential Prime Minister who stumbles when defending democratic fundamentals presents a troubling prospect for the nation's future. Voters must now grapple with the unsettling reality of a Labour Party seemingly adrift from its core values and the people it claims to represent.